story now. A principal from Zakhele Primary School in Kwapaca in the Eastern Cape was shot dead by alleged extortionists over the weekend, failing to pay a protection fee. Extortion has been on an alarming rise in the province. Just last week, we were in Mthatha at the two different schools that experienced extortion. Should more security be deployed to these schools? Let's now bring in the Basic Education Minister Siviwe Gwarube to weigh in on this matter. Minister, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. Not too sure if you're still in the Eastern Cape, but when you heard about this incident that happened, especially the one with the principal who was shot dead, what came to mind, and also what were you told about this incident?
Good morning, Aldrin, and good morning to your viewers of Newzroom Afrika. When you start to see how, as I indicated to the people here in the Eastern Cape, to the teachers and the various teachers that I was meeting yesterday, that the reality is that schools are but a microcosm of the communities that they exist in. If you've got violent communities, you can't insulate the schools from that. But what is most alarming for me is that the crime that we are seeing in our communities is now becoming rife, not only just in those communities, but in how it's playing out in our schools. It is absolutely tragic and really angering to hear about this incident of this principal that was allegedly gunned down because of a protection fee. And it's not something that is just limited to Kwapaca. And I mean, if you asked 5 years ago how villages were faring in terms of crime, you would realize that rural areas were almost insulated from the rise in crime rates. But we are seeing that also plaguing our schools. We know that as I was here, and I'm still here in the Eastern Cape, that the OR Tambo district, which is Mthatha, where you were last week, has also been experiencing this kind of crisis. But also here in Nelson Mandela Bay, where I'm at, we have a similar issue where in the northern parts of the city, in the northern suburbs of the city, the crime is rife. And just one of the principals I met yesterday, the deputy principal, was telling me he was held up at gunpoint. Now, Eldrin, what is clear here is that obviously as the Department of Education, we can't simply say this is not our core business to keep communities safe, so there's nothing we can do. So we have to figure out how best we can start protecting not only the 500,000 teachers that are in the system, but also the 13.5 million learners that are in our schools across 24,000 schools in the country. The reality is that I have to engage my counterpart, the Minister of Police, to say we've got to have a targeted approach that looks at how do we protect schools as places of safety and learning. The reality is that we are only about 48 days away from the matric exams commencing. We cannot have a situation where educators are saying, I no longer can go to work because I do not want to be staring down the barrel of a gun while doing my job. And so while we're dealing with the crime crisis, but we will also soon be dealing with an education crisis where people are refusing to go to work, and you cannot blame them. So I am going to be really raising this very harshly in cabinet tomorrow morning to say we need an entire government approach in dealing with this, whether it's local law enforcement, whether it's the South African Police Service, whether it's even business who are in the security business, to say, help us adopt 20 schools where you are already having businesses in those areas, patrol in those areas. We can't even invest with technology in some of these schools because within a week that the equipment is stolen. So we really are pressed against the wall here as a sector, Aldrin.
Yeah. Today, the Minister of Police, Senzo Mchunu, will be delivering a statement in Parliament to speak exactly on this issue in relation to extortion. As the Minister of Basic Education, I do understand that there will be a meeting again tomorrow in the Cabinet meeting. But what is it that you'd like to hear from the Minister when he addresses the legislators of the country about what needs to be done to ensure that we not only protect the children, as you've indicated, but also the staff members, because they are the ones who also have to face the barrel of the gun?
Absolutely. I know that the Department of Police, as I recently convened all the 9 MECs in the last 2 weeks, they've been raising the issue around crime in that are affecting and safety at schools. So we know that the police has been working on an integrated safety plan. But what I would really like to hear from the minister today and perhaps tomorrow in our meeting is how we can have a targeted approach that looks at schools as nodes of safety. And this may seem as though, I'm simply saying it's only schools that ought to be protected. But the reality here, Aldrin, is that we are dealing with millions of learners who have to get an education, who cannot wait until the next crime statistics tell us what is going on. We know what's going on. While I'm already on this national tour in the provinces, we know what's going on, and we know that schools are now being targeted, whether it's for robbery. There are people who are literally storming in schools, holding teachers at gunpoint and demanding their cell phones, their bags, stealing their cars. It cannot be, Aldrin. Otherwise, we're going to have a crisis where educators are refusing to be part of the system. They are the backbone of this education system. So I would like to see my colleague have some reflection on what would be the targeted approach for schools in particular as safety nodes, and how we can tap into the network of SAPs in our communities so we can best protect our educators and our learners.
Yeah, and what we've seen now as well is some learners also adopting this behavior. One of our reporters, Sipa Gema, is doing a story on one school, also in the Eastern Cape, where you have learners amongst themselves also demanding the so-called extortion fees from children who are victims of bullying.
Absolutely. And you see, that's why I'm saying that you can't insulate schools from the communities in which they exist, because, if you've got high levels of sexual violence in your community, high levels of crime, you're going to see that reflected in the classroom. And you see, even educators now are saying, I don't feel safe. Even with the learners in the classroom, I don't feel safe because they've adopted behaviors that are in their communities into the school. And so where that is concerned, Aldrin, is firmly within the realm of the DBE, where we have to be absolutely intolerant of bullying. We have to be intolerant of violence inside the school that is perpetrated by learners against other learners, or learners against teachers. That we have to be intolerant of. And the chain of command is simple. A principal will report the matter to the SGB and it will be escalated to the HOD. But learners who pose a risk to other learners have to be removed from schools, because we cannot be dealing with criminals outside and be dealing with people who are practicing criminality within the premises of the school. So we have to be absolutely ruthless in dealing with that kind of behavior inside the school. But we also have to say to communities, help us outside, because these children are exhibiting behaviors that they're picking up not here in school, but in their homes and in their communities. And so we have to work together.
Yeah, and also looking at allegations that even traditional authorities are involved in the so-called extortion. And, because on one end, yes, you have a school that may be built on communal land, but who does the school belong to, and who does the property itself belong to when infrastructure is built on that school? Like, for instance, a cell phone tower, and then you find the local chief allegedly demanding that the rentals also go to them.
And you see, and this is what I'm saying about a community that exhibits this kind of behavior, that, it really is all encompassing and seeps through every sector of society, including schools, because, you would think, particularly in deep rural areas where traditional leaders are really a very important stakeholder in not only just being the leaders of those communities, but also helping us in terms of saying, how do we get you on board in terms of dealing with violence in communities? So when the violence is perpetrated by the very people who are meant to be assisting us, who are leaders in society, then we have to be quite ruthless in dealing with it and saying, well, if that is the case, and that's why I really, strength to the minister's arm to say, well, the might of the state has to stare down organized crime. Aldrin, it has to stare down organized crime because it is getting out of hand. And so I really am going to be imploring the criminal justice cluster to say everything you can, throw everything you can at this, because it will then start to affect even our outcomes at an education level. And we know that our outcomes are not where they're meant to be. I would hate to see a regression, not because children are not wanting to study or educators are not going to school, but because of crime in the communities that they are in.
Yeah. And that story, of course, relating to Lapumi Kwezi, one of the stories that we're covering where the local chiefs allegedly are demanding a portion of a rental that is coming from the network provider. And I have to say, Minister, for me standing in that yard, it was during schooling hours, and you had heavily armed men in school. The police's strategy as well for the school was that they will be deploying police to the school. Young children, this is a primary school that we're speaking about, young children being exposed to such militancy at such a young age. What does that do to the kids that we are bringing up?
And this is, you're absolutely right, because you see the solution is not more boots on the ground or more guns at schools. The schools I was visiting here in Motherwell, Aldrin, they have bars. And you could see how there's been an attempt to come and break into the schools. There are places in that school where they cannot have windows, where they have essentially cemented the entire place, where the computer science lab does not have a window, because they say if we have windows, we know that these computers will be gone tomorrow. So really, and as you say, I mean, how can kids go and learn and be functional contributors to society when this is what they know? So this is not just a policing thing. This is a South African crisis. And that's why I'm really saying that, you know, we've got to find ways to find partnerships with government, with the sector, but also with communities, whether it's religious leaders, traditional leaders. We need their help, because this kind of behavior cannot be good. As you say, these are children in primary school, but they're in the presence of heavily armed people, and violence begets violence. So what they witness is what they will then essentially practice in years to come. And so it's not the solution. But at the same time, my primary focus now is to try and really protect the 14 million people in the system. They have to tick along and do what they need to do to get the results that we need to get. Because ultimately, the one thing we're not talking about also, Aldrin, is that what is really going to be the permanent solution to the kind of criminality we're seeing is actually economic growth and the way in which we really make inroads in terms of unemployment. And so that in itself also has to feature when we're talking about crime in South Africa, because the kind of desperation, recklessness, criminality we're seeing is definitely linked to the high levels of how 7 out of 10 young people don't have work in South Africa.
Sure. Quite sobering statistics there. And I want to bring you to this conversation because it's somewhat related to the economy as well as budget. Over the weekend, the statement that came through from the Western Cape Education Department that there will be about 2,400 contracts of teachers that are on contracts that will not be renewed because of the budgetary constraints and the agreement that was signed by national government in terms of a salary agreement with public servants. They say they're struggling. They also issued a statement, and in that statement, it's clear that it's not only the Western Cape that is dealing with this problem. You have KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga, the Northern Cape, as well as Gauteng. As the Minister of Basic Education, how are you going to deal with this issue? Velu Okamp yesterday, the spokesperson of the DA, said that apparently you will be meeting with the Minister of Finance because this has to deal with the budget cuts that have been experienced by the various departments, not just the Basic Education Department.
Yes, absolutely, Aldrin. I think is correct, because as you know, over the past 3-4 years, the sector has been, in real terms, seeing reductions in the budget, and of course, provinces themselves, because the compensation of teachers comes from the equitable share that goes to provinces. Provinces themselves have been seeing a reduction in budget allocations, but you know, I don't want to lament about the fact that there've been poor policy decision making that has been done, poor priority making that has been done over the years, because of course now here I am and we've got to solve the issue, and there are thousands of teachers who very well could not find themselves with work. On that humanitarian level alone, there's a concern, but also my big concern is we already have an issue in South Africa with overcrowding, where I cannot expect a teacher who's dealing with 40, 50 children in a classroom to produce the kind of results that we need to jolt our education system out of the place where it is in now. And so that's why I'm really wanting to put together a comprehensive picture for the Minister of Finance of what the situation, not only in the Western Cape, in KZN, Gauteng, what it looks like. And so, and when we talk about austerity, then, Aldrin, we really have to mean it. We have to say that we've been trimming the fat. Now these budget cuts are hitting the bone. We cannot have a scenario where we are cutting frontline services such as teachers, nurses, policemen and women, and then think that somehow as a country we're going to be moving forward. We're not. And so difficult decisions have to be made. Obviously, we will make on behalf of the provinces the case to Treasury, and we are hoping that the minister can really look at this and see where we can find solution, because we can't lose the kind of teachers that we are talking about if we really are serious about improving literacy in South Africa.
Yeah, are you hopeful that there could be an opportunity to reverse some of the decisions that have been taken, considering once again, as you've indicated, that you have some qualified teachers that are unemployed?
Yes, I'm hopeful we can, and a quick example, Aldrin, here in the Eastern Cape, they've employed a specific strategy where they are, allowing teachers who are already at retirement age to say, all right, how do we help you if you want to leave the system, so that we can really start to employ younger teachers and get more teachers who are qualified in the system. They've also made some concessions with their provincial treasury to make sure that they can keep at least the current sort of basket of posts in the province. So there are ways in which we can do this, but we have to be courageous in our decision making, and we have to be ruthless in saying, what is a priority? Well, are we going to bail out an SOE, or are we going to pay teachers? And for me, that's what it's come down to now. And so that's the case I would be making to my cabinet colleagues, that, as a country, we've got to decide, are we going to be cutting teachers, or are we going to be looking elsewhere where there can be some cuts? Because we now as a sector can no longer take any further cuts without it affecting the very product that we produce.
Yeah, certainly. And speaking here about a population that's supposed to be productive as well. Thank you so much for your time. That is the Minister of Basic Education, Siviwe Gwarube.